Barrier 12, the management of volunteers. What issues arise regarding the management of volunteers?
Oh gosh, well, in a sense, management underlies all the stuff I've talked about before, I think. It's sort of linked with the bureaucracy issue that I talked about earlier. That we've got an image, or we used to have an image, that we're low on bureaucracy and low on management, and I think the sector still remains undermanaged rather than overmanaged, or volunteers would feel that. Relatively few have job descriptions, relatively few claim claim expenses and so on. But I think people may come in from the outside thinking it'll be somehow totally different in the voluntary sector to how it's been in the business world. But in some long-established large organisations, charities, they may be national, even international, there are sort of long-established systems been built up over years. So volunteers aren't coming into a sort of situation where they're writing their own role descriptions or ways of running the agencies. They will almost inevitably be fitting in with a pre-established system of management. That obviously doesn't apply to short-lived campaigns and new organisations, where people for a year or two will be making it up as they go along. And that's entirely appropriate. I think, without anybody ever deciding it, the sector has decided that there's only one good way of running voluntary organisations now, which is called the sort of professional or workplace model, which replicates big business or even the military. And I think that's a little bit sad. I mean, they're sort of hierarchical, top-down organisations, and they won't suit every volunteer, certainly not the dancing volunteers. They may suit the marching volunteers. So there are actually alternatives to that, and I quite like there is the charismatic model of management, of course, which is very topical at the moment, 2015, in that Camilla Batman-Gelly oversaw a very creative organisation, Kids Company, but it very abruptly and tragically came to an end. So there is a charismatic model of management as well, which is often quite inspirational for people to link up with. And I think there are also what I would call democratic or collective models of management, which are much flatter, where everybody's involved in every decision, and every decision may take an awful long time. But that is another way of working, I think, which may be attractive, particularly to young volunteers who may come looking, they don't want to work at the council, they don't want to work in businesses, they're expecting an alternative from the voluntary sector. So there are different models of management, but the overwhelmingly most popular ones now seem to be the professional model, which really apes or mimics big business. I think that's a bit sad, and that's not terribly creative, I think, for many of the volunteers that we get.
And it just people seeking an alternative to statutory or business organisations. One might suppose that the voluntary sector was that alternative, but obviously, as I agree entirely with what you're saying, it's often not, is it?
That's right. I think the statutory sector often welcomes the innovation and the differences. They admire sometimes the innovations that voluntary groups can make, almost envious. They wish they were free to do some of the things we do, and yet we're still getting pressed into this very stereotypical way of running organisations, which is quite sad.
Do you think that after the innovation phase might come the professionalisation phase?
That's right. And I think also, voluntary groups may feel, well, to get on with the council, to submit a bid to the lottery that rings bells with them, we've got to adopt more and more complex policies and safeguards and so on. And there may be some truth in that, but at the same time, those other parties are looking at us and say, oh, the freedom they've got, thank God they can do things we can't. We might not be able to publicly say that, but I think sometimes that's what they feel.
Okay. What about volunteer coordinators?
Oh gosh, yes. This work has been an education for me, and this has been a huge lesson, I think. I think if voluntary organisations have more than, say, 20 or 30 volunteers, not too many paid staff, volunteers in quite complex roles, in different sites, and clients who are vulnerable, then they need to start thinking about whether they need some secure management time allocated to volunteers. I think there are general purpose managers, generic managers, who are responsible for a whole range of things. But one of them said to me, there are many things I could be sacked for not doing, but managing volunteers isn't one of them. So there may be other things which take priority for the general purposes manager or chief executive. It might be fundraising, it might be getting new properties and so on. But managing and retaining volunteer workers is not high priority in comparison. So I think the first thing people are going to say is that when they say, well, go and get a volunteer coordinator, they're going to say, well, we can't afford it. But not all volunteer coordinators are salaried, and not all are full-time. But I think volunteers often feel they want somebody that's within grabbing distance, somebody who, if you leave a message, they'll get back the same day. And general purpose managers may be off on another part of the counter in London at a conference. And it's difficult to give volunteers the personalised attention I think they need without a specialist volunteer coordinator.
And it's quite interesting that obviously the voluntary sector relies on volunteers, but volunteer coordinators aren't everywhere.
No, I think it's a figure like 1 in 10 organisations have volunteer coordinators, and some may indeed need more. And I think that the notion of voluntary volunteer coordinators is worth exploring, so that you might have 2 or 3 different volunteer coordinators taking responsibility, maybe for small groups of volunteers, who might work on a 2-day-a-week basis, something like that. If sums of money can't be found for a permanent appointment, and we know how difficult financially things are going to be for some years yet, I'm sure of that. And this could be a way of developing more independent volunteer teams. And we know volunteers are engaged in some very delicate and sensitive work with their clients, and they need, I think, often more experience, paid or volunteer staff around them to whom they can turn for advice and support.